First contact gone wrong. The Galactic Council's emergency beacon pulsed with an urgency not seen in 10,000 years. Representatives from 100 spacefaring civilizations gathered in their crystalline chamber, their faces illuminated by the holographic displays showing the approaching doom. The Void Swarm. Admiral Zextal, her iridescent scales reflecting the emergency lights, addressed the assembly. The Void Swarm has already consumed 3 star systems. Their biomechanical ships adapt to every weapon we deploy. They learn from each defeat, evolving faster than our best AIs can counter. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within 6 months. The chamber erupted in panic. The Void Swarm was unlike anything they'd encountered before. A hybrid of organic and mechanical components that consumed everything in its path, growing stronger with each victory. Traditional weapons proved useless against their rapidly evolving defenses. What of the Archean defense grid? Asked Ambassador Cthulhu, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Surely the most advanced defensive network in known space. Bypassed, Zextal interrupted, her voice heavy. They adapted to its quantum barriers in hours. The Archean system is gone. Silence fell over the chamber. The Archean were among the oldest civilizations, their defensive technologies the product of millions of years of development. If they couldn't stop the swarm, there might be another way, came a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. All eyes turned to Dr. Sarah Chen, the first human representative to the Galactic Council. Her species had only achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago, earning them a provisional seat mainly out of diplomatic courtesy. This is hardly the time for primitive solutions, sneered High Commander Yulthin of the Centaurian Empire. Your species barely understands quantum mechanics. Sarah stepped forward, her holographic displays showing something that made even the most advanced beings in the room pause. A simulation of controlled chaos. We don't need to outthink the swarm, she explained. We need to outmaneuver it. My team has been studying your reports, and we've noticed something you've all missed because you're too advanced. The declaration drew confused murmurs. Too advanced. The concept seemed paradoxical to the assembled aliens. The Void Swarm adapts through perfect logical progression. It analyzes patterns and develops countermeasures based on mathematical certainty. But humans, Sarah smiled, we're anything but logical. She gestured, and her holographic display showed humanity's history of warfare and problem-solving. We survived on Earth, not by being the strongest or smartest, but by being unpredictable. We developed thousands of different fighting styles, each contradicting the others. We solve problems by combining solutions that shouldn't work together. We thrive on controlled chaos. Admiral Zextal's compound eyes studied the humans' displays intently. You're suggesting we fight chaos with chaos. Exactly. The swarm's adaptation is its strength, but also its weakness. It can't adapt to what it can't predict. And nothing is more unpredictable than human ingenuity. The council chamber buzzed with discussion. The concept seemed absurd to civilizations built on logical progression and perfect order. Yet the display showed countless examples of humans achieving the impossible through seemingly illogical combinations of tactics. And how would you propose we implement this? Chaos? Asked the council elder, their crystalline form shimmering with curiosity. Sarah's eyes lit up. We'll need volunteers from every civilization here. Not your best warriors or smartest scientists. We need those who think differently. The dreamers, the rebels, the ones who don't fit in. And we'll need access to your technologies, not to use them as designed, but to reimagine them completely. This is madness, declared High Commander Yulthin. You want us to entrust the fate of the galaxy to misfits and dreamers. Madness? Sarah's smile widened. Madness is doing the same thing and expecting different results. The swarm has beaten your logical approaches every time. Maybe it's time for something illogical. Admiral Zextal rose slowly, her scales shifting from skeptical red to contemplative blue. The human has a point. We've tried everything else. Perhaps Perhaps it's time to try impossible things. The council chamber erupted in heated debate, but Sarah stood firm. She knew humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their intelligence. It was their ability to think outside every box, to combine the impossible with the improbable, and somehow make it work. As the council argued, the emergency beacon continued its pulse, counting down the moments until the void swarm would reach the next system. But for the first time since the crisis began, there was something new in the chamber. Hope. Wild, illogical, human hope. The human solution. The Galactic Council's primary research facility, a massive space station orbiting a binary star system, had never seen such chaos. Where once pristine laboratories housed careful, methodical experiments, now dozens of species worked in what could only be described as organized mayhem. Sarah Chen stood at the heart of it all, directing what she dubbed Project Pandora. Around her, screens displayed the void swarm's steady advance through the outer systems, but her attention was focused on the unlikely team she'd assembled. No, that's perfect, she exclaimed, watching a Voltarian energy specialist deliberately misalign a quantum core. The instability is exactly what we need. The Voltarian, Zix, clicked his mandibles nervously. But the containment field, it's operating at 47% efficiency. Our protocols require at least 99.99%. Protocols are what the swarm expects, Sarah replied, her eyes gleaming. They'll be ready for perfect. They won't be ready for beautiful disasters. Across the chamber, a young Arctian survivor named Hella worked with a human demolitions expert, Jack Torres. Their project looked like a violation of several laws of physics. Quantum entangled particles deliberately set to conflicting states, held together by what Jack called duct tape and prayers. It shouldn't work, Tella whispered, her crystalline form vibrating with anxiety. The mathematical models show. Math is great, Jack interrupted, applying another strip of the silvery tape. But you know what's better? Happy accidents. Did you know humans discovered one of our most useful adhesives when someone messed up a chemistry experiment? Admiral Zextal entered the chamber, accompanied by several council observers. Their expressions ranged from horror to fascination as they watched the proceedings. A Centaurian quantum computer had been reprogrammed to generate random outputs, its perfect logic corrupted by human chaos theory. A Medusan plasma forge was being used backward, creating unstable energy patterns that defy prediction. This is your great solution, High Commander Yilthin demanded, watching a team of humans teach a group of alien engineers how to improvise with limited resources, teaching advanced civilizations to make mistakes. Sarah turned to face the observers, her hands covered in grease from helping modify a planetary defense core. Not mistakes, variations. The swarm adapts to patterns. So we're creating weapons and defenses that don't follow any pattern at all. She gestured to a massive holographic display showing test results. Look at this. When we fired a perfectly calibrated quantum beam at a captured swarm fragment, it adapted in 3.2 seconds. But when we fired the same weapon with deliberate fluctuations in power and frequency, random harmonics we introduced by literally banging on the containment housing, it couldn't adapt. It couldn't find a pattern to counter. Because there was no pattern, Admiral Zextal realized, her scales shifting to an intrigued purple, just like your species' history of warfare. Exactly. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. Humans never developed one perfect fighting style. We created thousands of them, each with strengths and weaknesses. When one didn't work, we didn't just improve it. We created something completely different. The swarm is like a perfect martial artist who's trained to counter every known style. We're teaching the galaxy to dance randomly. The facility shook as another test fired, this one combining Medusan plasma technology with human percussion instruments. The resulting wave of energy moved in ways that made several of the council observers feel nauseous just watching it. But the cost in resources, Yilthin protested. The inefficiency is our greatest strength, Sarah completed. The swarm expects us to use everything at maximum efficiency. They expect logical progression, careful conservation of resources. Instead, we're going to hit them with everything at once, in ways that make no sense. Every weapon will behave differently every time it's fired. Every shield will fluctuate randomly. A cheer went up from one of the testing chambers. A team had successfully combined ancient Archean crystal technology with human music theory, creating defensive barriers that pulsed and shifted like a jazz improvisation. "We're not just building weapons," Sarah explained, her voice soft but intense. "We're teaching the galaxy how to improvise, how to embrace chaos as a strategy. The swarm is perfect, and that's why it will lose, because the universe itself isn't perfect. It's wild and unpredictable, just like humanity." Admiral Zextel moved to study the test results more closely. The numbers were horrible by any standard measure of efficiency, but the results were undeniable. The swarm's adaptation protocols were failing against these chaotic attacks. "Perhaps," the Admiral said slowly, "it's time we learned to be a little less perfect." Sarah smiled, watching as more and more alien scientists began to embrace the controlled chaos around them. "That's the spirit. Now, who wants to help me attach these speakers to a quantum torpedo? I have a theory about using death metal to disrupt their neural networks." The council observers watched in mixed horror and amazement as the galaxy's most advanced civilizations learned to think like humans, and for the first time since the swarm appeared, the impossible seemed possible. Trial by fire. The Helios system would be their testing ground. A strategic choke point between the outer rim and the core worlds, it represented their best chance to halt the Void Swarm's advance. The combined fleet of the Galactic Council hung in space like a constellation of artificial stars. But these weren't the neat, orderly formations typical of advanced civilizations. "This is either going to be the most brilliant defense in galactic history," Admiral Zextal observed from her command ship, "or the most spectacular failure." Sarah Chen stood beside her, watching as ships deliberately positioned themselves at what conventional tactical doctrine would consider terrible angles. "In my experience, sometimes it's both at the same time." The fleet was a testament to controlled chaos. Archean crystal ships had been modified with human-designed randomization matrices, their perfect geometric forms now rippling with unpredictable energy patterns. Centaurian warships had their quantum targeting systems replaced with what Jack Torres called shotgun mathematics, precision sacrificed for overwhelming randomness. "Swarm vessels entering the system," announced the sensor officer, their voice tense. "Initial count, over 10,000 ships." The Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace like a metallic cancer, their biomechanical ships shifting and adapting even as they appeared. Their usual perfect formation, however, seemed to falter as their sensors registered the bizarre array before them. "They're confused," Sarah noted, watching the swarm's movements. "Their pattern recognition is trying to make sense of our formation and failing." Now, the battle began with a cacophony that could never have been planned. Each ship fired weapons modified by Project Pandora, but none fired the same way twice. Quantum beams pulsed with random frequencies, their power levels fluctuating wildly. Plasma torpedoes spiraled in mathematical impossibilities, their trajectories guided by algorithms based on human music and poetry. The first wave of swarm ships moved to adapt, their surfaces shifting to counter the attacks, but there was no pattern to adapt to. Where they developed shields against high-energy weapons, they were struck by deliberately underpowered shots that slipped through their defenses. When they adjusted for variable energy levels, they were hit by weapons combining technologies in ways that should never have worked. "Look," Tella called out from her station, her crystalline form vibrating with excitement. "The improvised weapons are working. They can't predict what they can't understand." Indeed, the swarm's greatest strength, its ability to analyze and adapt, had become its weakness. Each ship tried to evolve defenses against the attacks it faced, but the attacks never remained consistent enough to counter. It was like trying to develop an immunity to chaos itself. But the swarm was far from defeated. As the battle progressed, it began to show signs of adapting to the overall strategy of randomness. Several human-modified ships were lost as the swarm started to anticipate the unpredictable. "They're learning," Admiral Zextal warned, her scales darkening with concern. "Even chaos becomes a pattern if used consistently." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Then let's change the pattern of chaos itself. Signal the fleet. Implement Protocol Jazz." Jazz. The Admiral's translator struggled with the concept. "Human music based on improvisation," Sarah explained quickly. "We've prepared for this. Every ship has a secondary set of modifications. Tell them to switch now." The order went out, and the already chaotic battle transformed again. Ships that had been firing randomly now began to coordinate in brief, unpredictable moments before breaking apart again. Weapons that had been operating independently suddenly synchronized for split seconds before diverging into new patterns. The swarm's adaptation protocols went into overdrive, trying to predict when the ships would coordinate and when they would act independently. But like jazz musicians improvising together, each moment of coordination was unique and unrepeatable. "It's working," Tella announced. "Swarm adaptation rates are dropping. They can't establish baseline patterns to evolve against." The battle raged for hours, becoming what would later be described as a symphony of beautiful destruction. The Void Swarm, for the first time in its existence, found itself unable to achieve tactical superiority through adaptation. Its ships began to fall, unable to defend against attacks that defied not just conventional tactics, but the very nature of logical progression. But victory came at a cost. Nearly a third of the defending fleet was lost, their sacrifices buying time for others to press the advantage. Yet even in destruction, the human-modified ships added to the chaos, their deliberately unstable cores detonating in ways that created unpredictable energy patterns, further confounding the swarm's adaptation protocols. As the last swarm ships either fell or retreated, the bridge of the command ship erupted in cheers. Admiral Zextal's scales shifted to victorious gold, but her expression remained thoughtful as she turned to Sarah. "We've won this battle," she said, "but the swarm will try to adapt to this strategy for future encounters." Sarah nodded, her expression both tired and determined. "That's why every battle needs to be different. We've shown that chaos can beat their order. Now we need to make sure our chaos never becomes predictable." The Admiral studied the battlefield, where debris from both sides drifted in patterns as random as the strategy that created them. "You know," she said slowly, "in all my years of military service, I never thought I would say this, but I'm beginning to appreciate imperfection." Sarah smiled, watching as recovery ships began their work, each moving in deliberately erratic patterns. "Perfection is overrated. The universe is messy, random, and beautiful. Maybe it's time the galaxy embraced that." The battle was over, but its implications were just beginning to ripple through galactic society. The victory at Helios wouldn't just change military doctrine. It would transform how the galaxy's most advanced civilizations thought about progress, perfection, and the true nature of evolution. Unity in diversity. In the weeks following the Battle of Helios, the Galactic Council's main command center transformed from a temple of order into a laboratory of controlled chaos. Representatives from every species huddled together, sharing not just technologies but philosophies, art, and what humans called crazy ideas. "You're telling me?" Tella asked incredulously, her crystalline form reflecting the holographic displays around her, that humans sometimes solve problems by specifically not trying to solve them. Jack Torres nodded, sketching out a diagram with deliberately messy lines. "We call it lateral thinking. Sometimes the best way to fix something is to step back and let your mind wander." Some of our biggest breakthroughs came when scientists were daydreaming or working on completely unrelated problems. The concept seemed to cause physical pain to the logical Arctian, but she was learning. After Helios, no one could deny the power of human unpredictability. Sarah Chen stood at the central planning table, where Admiral Zextal and representatives from 20 different species worked on the next phase of their strategy. The Void Swarm had withdrawn to regroup, giving them precious time to prepare. "The swarm will expect us to repeat our successful tactics," the Admiral noted, her scales shifting through analytical patterns. "They're likely developing counters to randomized attacks as we speak." "Then we don't just randomize our attacks," Sarah replied, pulling up a new simulation. "We randomize everything. Our ship's formations, our communication patterns, even our retreat strategies. But more importantly, we need to tap into something the swarm can't possibly predict: cultural diversity." The assembled aliens watched as she brought up displays showing different species' artistic patterns, architectural styles, and cultural philosophies. Every civilization here developed differently, evolved different ways of thinking. Instead of trying to standardize our approach, we need to embrace these differences and combine them in ways that have never been tried before. A Medusan engineer, their tentacles writhing with excitement, stepped forward. "Like how we combined our plasma harmonics with human music to create those unpredictable energy patterns." "Exactly." Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious. "But we can go further. The Voltarians understand energy in ways humans never imagined, but humans understand rhythm and improvisation in ways Voltarians never considered. Together, we're not just combining technologies, we're combining ways of thinking." The command center buzzed with new energy as species began to pair up in unexpected combinations. A group of Centaurian mathematicians worked with human artists, developing attack patterns based on abstract expressionism. Archean crystal engineers consulted with human musicians, creating defensive systems that responded to emotional resonance rather than logical algorithms. "Look at this," Tella called out, her voice vibrating with unusual excitement. She and Jack had been working on something in a corner of the facility. "We combined Archean crystal harmonics with human sports theory, specifically something called basketball. The crystals respond to improvised movements, creating shield patterns that flow like a team passing a ball." Admiral Zextal watched as their test simulation showed swarm attacks being deflected by shields that moved with athletic grace rather than mathematical precision. "It's beautiful," she admitted, her scales shifting to an appreciative blue. "And more importantly, completely unpredictable to an enemy that thinks in pure logic." But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young Voltarian researcher, inspired by human children's games, proposed what they called the playground protocol. "Children at play follow no logical pattern," they explained, their mandibles clicking excitedly. "They switch games midstream, combine rules from different activities, and invent new ways to use old toys. What if we applied that thinking to our fleet movements?" The concept was revolutionary. Instead of trying to outsmart the swarm, they would outplay them. Battle formations would switch tactics mid-engagement. Ships would combine their capabilities in ways that made no tactical sense, but worked through sheer audacity, and every engagement would be treated as a new game with new rules. Sarah watched as the various species began to shed their rigid adherence to perfection and embrace the creative chaos of collaboration. The Void Swarm's greatest advantage, its ability to analyze and adapt to patterns, was becoming its greatest weakness as it faced an enemy that refused to follow any pattern at all. "We're not just fighting the swarm anymore," she remarked to Admiral Zextal as they watched a group of Medusans teaching humans their philosophical dance movements while humans taught them Earth sports. "We're revolutionizing how the galaxy thinks about progress." The Admiral's scales rippled with thoughtful colors. "For millions of years, we believe advancement meant moving toward perfect order. Your species has shown us that true evolution requires embracing chaos and diversity." A cheer went up from one of the testing areas. A team had successfully combined Centaurian quantum mechanics with human improvisational theater, creating weapon systems that performed differently with each use while maintaining devastating effectiveness. "The swarm expects us to either stick to our successful strategies or try to develop better ones," Sarah explained, watching the celebration. They can't conceive of an enemy that deliberately chooses to be unpredictable. Every species here has something unique to offer, not just in technology, but in how they think, how they solve problems, how they play. As the day continued, more barriers broke down between species. Traditional hierarchies gave way to collaborative chaos, with ideas flowing freely between all ranks and races. The once sterile command center now hummed with the energy of a creative workshop, or as Jack put it, the galaxy's biggest brainstorming session. The Void Swarm was evolving, yes, but for the first time in its existence, it was facing an enemy that evolved not through logical progression, but through creative leaps and bounds. The galaxy was learning to dance to humanity's chaotic rhythm, and in that dance, they were discovering strengths they never knew they had. Legacy of Hope. The final confrontation with the Void Swarm took place in the Nexus sector, a massive convergence of spatial anomalies that had once been considered too dangerous for conventional warfare. But conventional had long since been abandoned. The combined fleet of the Galactic Council looked nothing like its former self. Each ship was now a unique fusion of multiple species technologies and philosophies. Archean crystal ships pulsed with human music, their geometric perfection deliberately shattered into beautiful asymmetry. Centaurian warships moved like dancers, their quantum drives modified to incorporate Medusan fluid dynamics. Void Swarm approaching, announced Tella from her station aboard the flagship. Their numbers. They've committed their entire force. Sarah Chen stood with Admiral Zextal on the bridge, watching as the massive biomechanical armada emerged from hyperspace. The swarm had evolved since Helios, their ships now displaying the complexity that suggested they had been preparing for every possible variation of the Allies' chaotic strategy. "They think they're ready for us," Sarah observed, a slight smile playing at her lips. "They've probably developed countermeasures for everything we've done before." "Then it's fortunate," Admiral Zextal replied, her scales shifting to a determined gold, "that we're not planning to do anything we've done before." The signal went out across the Allied fleet. Initialize protocol. First snow. The name had come from a late-night discussion where Sarah had tried to explain to her alien colleagues why humans found snowflakes so fascinating. How each one was unique, how they formed patterns that never repeated, how they could turn the most ordered landscape into something wonderfully chaotic. The battle began not with a coordinated attack, but with what appeared to be complete disorder. Every ship in the Allied fleet acted independently, following no discernible pattern. Some launched attacks that seemed to miss wildly, only for the energy patterns to curve through the spatial anomalies in impossible ways. Others appeared to malfunction, venting plasma in what the swarm's tactical computers initially dismissed as damage, until those same plasma clouds began to form complex, unpredictable fields that trapped and corroded swarm vessels. "They're trying to adapt," Tella reported, her crystalline form vibrating with excitement. "Their ships are cycling through defensive configurations, but they can't settle on effective countermeasures." The swarm's strength had always been its ability to analyze and counter any strategy through rapid evolution. But now it faced not one strategy but thousands, each ship in the Allied fleet operating on its own unique combination of technologies and tactics. Like snowflakes in a storm, no two attacks were exactly alike. Jack Torres, now coordinating from a modified Voltarian cruiser, launched what he called his greatest hits, weapons that combine the mathematical precision of alien technology with the deliberate imperfection of human artistry. Quantum torpedoes programmed with jazz improvisation patterns, plasma beams that fluctuated based on poetry rhythms, crystal resonators that responded to emotional readings from their crews. The Void Swarm's attempts to adapt became increasingly desperate. Their ships began to show signs of confusion, their evolutionary algorithms overwhelmed by the sheer variety of challenges they faced. When they developed shields against energy weapons, they were hit by weapons that weren't technically weapons at all, modified communication arrays, repurposed mining beams, even deliberately destabilized drive systems used as offensive tools. "They're starting to break formation," Admiral Zextal announced, her scales rippling with victory's approach. Their adaptive protocols are actually fighting each other, trying to simultaneously evolve defenses against too many different types of attacks. The tide turned definitively when Sarah gave the order to implement what she called the final, a strategy that could only work once, but would work spectacularly. Every ship in the Allied fleet suddenly switched to broadcasting on all frequencies, each transmitting different combinations of music, mathematical equations, and cultural art forms from their respective species. The Void Swarm, which had evolved to analyze and interpret all forms of communication, found itself drowning in an ocean of information that defied logical analysis. Their neural networks, trying to find patterns in the chaos, began to overload. Their ships are cannibalizing each other, Teller reported. They're trying to evolve faster than their structures can handle. The swarm's desperate final evolution became its undoing. Ships began to break apart as their biomechanical components fought against each other, each trying to adapt to a different aspect of the Allies' assault. What had begun as a battle became almost a cultural performance, with the combined creative energy of the galaxy's civilizations overwhelming an enemy that could only understand progress in terms of logical advancement. As the last swarm ships either disintegrated or flowed into deep space, never to return, the cheers that erupted across the Allied fleet were unlike anything the galaxy had heard before. Each species celebrated in their own way, their voices combining into a symphony of victory that embodied everything they had learned about the strength found in diversity. In the aftermath, as the Allied fleet regrouped among the spatial anomalies that had helped ensure their victory, Admiral Zextal turned to Sarah with an expression that mixed awe with amusement. "You humans," she said, her scales showing colors that had no translation in any known language, "have changed everything. We thought we were teaching you about advanced technology, but you taught us something far more important." "What's that?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "That perfection is boring," the Admiral replied. "That true strength lies not in achieving perfect order, but in embracing the beautiful chaos of being alive. Our civilization spent millennia trying to eliminate uncertainty from our existence. You showed us that uncertainty is what makes existence worth celebrating." The legacy of the Void Swarm War transformed galactic civilization. The Galactic Council's headquarters, once a monument to geometric perfection, was redesigned to incorporate deliberate elements of chaos and creativity from every member species. Scientific research began to emphasize innovation over optimization, with teams deliberately structured to include different perspectives and approaches. But perhaps most importantly, humanity's provisional seat on the Council was made permanent, with a unique designation that made humans not just members, but designated guardians of creative chaos, a role that acknowledged their special talent for finding brilliant solutions in the most unlikely places. As Sarah Chen looked out at the transformed galaxy, she recalled something her grandmother used to say. The universe wasn't built in straight lines. Now, finally, the most advanced civilizations in existence were beginning to understand exactly what that meant.